Designers, artists, and creatives all have a few things in common. We encounter these mental barriers like imposter syndrome, creative block, and burnout. The worst of them all, though, that I see plague myself and plenty of other talented designers is perfectionism. Perfect is the lifelong enemy of good, and some of the best piece of advice that I've ever gotten is these 5 words: done is better than perfect. I think as designers, we get so wrapped up in the idea of everything we do being perfect that it can cripple us from ever finishing or sometimes even starting projects in the first place. This is the main cancer that perfectionism causes. What is perfectionism exactly though? Well, Brown University defines it as a set of self-defeating thoughts and behaviors aimed at reaching excessively high and unrealistic goals. Perfectionism is often mistakenly seen in our society as something that's desirable or even necessary for success. But in my opinion, not only is perfectionism undesirable, but it's the opposite of being a necessity in the success department, and it's actually one of success's biggest enemies. And before I dive too deep into this topic, I don't want to be misinterpreted as someone advocating for not taking your time with your work or sending things out into the world that aren't up to the standard that you set yourself at. We should all take plenty of pride in our work, our process, and whatever that process entails and whatever time that takes. What I am specifically getting at is knowing something you are creating is amazing and should be a few % away from completion, but this so-called perfectionism sabotages the entire project. Enjoy the process, and instead of having a results-oriented mindset, take pride in the fact that you continue to try. If you're so focused on achieving some unobtainable goal, it can spoil the beauty of the creative process itself. Perfectionism can plague a good, great, and even amazing project and turn it into nothing at all by either stopping it in its tracks in the ideation stage or creeping up right before you place that final piece of the puzzle. We all want to do our best work. I understand that. But perfection is an unobtainable goal. So I'm here to tell you why you should strive for good and done rather than perfect and unfinished. I see this kind of thing all across the internet. Some of my most talented friends and designers I know online go ghost for a while because they aren't satisfied with some kind of aspect of their work. The problem though is that the work hasn't changed, or if anything, it's changed in a positive way. What has changed negatively though is just their perspective. Their perspective gets shifted from free and hard working to analysis paralysis. Overthinking can stop a good idea in its tracks and prevent the world from ever seeing the beauty that you can create. And there may be people who disagree with this idea too, and take jabs at my work even. However, I think completing things that are great, not perfect, and being vulnerable with the world when you present them is far more admirable than hiding behind this artist facade of, well, my work is special. My work has to be perfect. I'm a perfectionist. In my opinion, perfectionism usually ends up just being a coping mechanism for never starting or finishing anything. You could very well be the next Picasso or Andy Warhol or Takashi Murakami, but if no one ever sees your work because it's never finished and you're never vulnerable enough to show it to us, then what's the point? If you spend 30 years working on something that could be the next Mona Lisa and present it to the world, no one will know who you are. They'll never have seen any of your work. And it's more likely than not that it'll end up going nowhere. Instead, you could have released a so-called Mona Lisa every day, every week, or every year for the last 29 years. And the piece you create on the 30th year or 30th week or whatever it may be will be much better than spending 30 years working on that singular thing. Paraphrasing that idea reminded me of a story of where I got that from about a pottery class. The ceramics teacher on the first day of the class divided the students into 2 groups. All those on the left side of the studio would be graded solely on the quantity of their work. They would produce 30 pots in 30 days, and all the students on the right would be graded on the quality of the pot. They would have 30 days to produce 1 pot. The procedure was simple. On the final day of class, he'd gather all the students, compare the pots from the quantity bunch and the quality bunch. I'm sure you see where this is going. Well, when it came time to grade, the works of highest quality were all produced by the group that was graded for quantity. It seems while the quantity group was busily churning out new pots every day, learning from their mistakes, and continuing to iterate, the quality group sat for 30 days theorizing about perfection, and in the end, the quality group had little more to show for their efforts than grandiose theories and one lackluster final pot, or just a pile of dead clay. I like to think the idea of quantity versus quality isn't really an argument, but rather two things that work together. You only get to quality from doing the quantity. Overcoming the fear of not being good enough as a beginner and accepting the fact that you might not be great right away is liberating, and the amazing thing is if you keep at it and commit to iteration and learning, you will get to quality. I know this has sounded more focused on artists too, rather than the traditional work of a graphic designer. However, I think as the culture of visual art continues to have its lines blurred and mediums expanded, graphic design is more art than ever. Have no doubt though, this fear of perfection also applies to traditional client work as well. If you're afraid to take on projects that intimidate you, or ones you don't think will turn out perfectly, you very may well never work with the clients that you desire. It's important to put yourself out there and be vulnerable with clients at times. Even in the revision process, the design is never going to be perfect because of its subjective nature. And you and the client have different worldviews, so do your best to combat perfectionism, whether it's within a client project or in a personal piece like this poster I'm working on. Here's the finished poster from the time lapse. It's the 20th installment of a poster design series I've been working on called Blues Legends. You can only improve, iterate, and learn by finishing projects. If you let the fear of being perfect prevent you from completing things, you'll never grow and you'll get stuck in the same place working on the same type of things over and over. At the end of the day, I just want you to know I'm speaking about this issue from a place of love and encouragement, not criticism. For your own good as an artist, and for me selfishly to see more cool stuff in the world, get shit done. Perfection is the enemy of good, and done is better than perfect.